political commentator Adam Schwarz. Thanks for coming. And once again, Dr. Saleha Hassan, who lost her father to COVID. Thank you so much for coming in, both of you. Why don't we start with you, Adam, because I haven't talked to you about this before. So Boris Johnson, obviously very emotional, recalling his own time in intensive care. We're going to go back to Dr. Hassan to talk about what he said about there were lots of young men in there. It wasn't at all what he had imagined or what people said he would find. The profile of people much younger, much broader than he thought it would be. But then he got cross about the representation of Partygate and what was actually going on at Number 10. So do you think that he has grounds to be short-tempered and aggravated by this, or do you think that actually what was said was accurate and he doesn't appreciate how offensive what happened was to so many people?
Well, I think you're absolutely right to draw the contrast between what Boris Johnson said and with him getting emotional, because obviously the sense of getting emotional gives a sense of sort of contrition and empathy about what happened. But actually you contrast that with him getting very angry. I think that shows a very different side of him, which tends to come out the longer he's interrogated in this way. We saw it as well during Parliament when he was being interrogated by the Privileges Committee. And I think this all comes back to actually how he deals with the situation of being in private and how he deals with the situation of being in public. And we've saw the kind of issues to do with that raised so many times. For example, it was shown to him some evidence that said that he had said in a meeting on the 19th of March, why are we destroying everything for people who will die soon anyway? And he called them bed blockers, vulnerable people. And his response to being asked that by Hugo Keith was, well, actually that comment was not meant to be said in public. And I think that doesn't really matter, because fundamentally you should be behaving in a way, private in government, which is consistent with how you are behaving overall. And I think that is why it's so important that we are having an inquiry to find out these things. And I think really, it's so important on days like this of heightened political theatre, when we have a former Prime Minister being interrogated in this way, that we remember what this inquiry is really about. And that is to examine the government's response to COVID, to understand what the lessons might have been learned for a future pandemic, and in doing so really provide some answers and hopefully some closure and some sense of accountability to the millions of people across the UK who've lost loved ones to this horrible virus.
Well, Dr. Hassan is one of those people, not just a doctor. She was explaining yesterday that at her hospital they lost something like 30 patients, but also her own father. So you're everything, the doctor, the patient, the person, to whom in a way this whole inquiry is directed, to see whether you understand, whether you're getting some kind of closure, and also whether medically we're learning anything so it doesn't all happen again, heaven forbid. So when you saw Boris talking about intensive care, his experience there's nothing like thinking you're going to die in St Thomas's Hospital and people striving to keep you alive. And he did say when he came out, didn't he, thank you to all these different people. Do you remember they were from all over the world who had contributed to keeping him alive that night, saving his life? So when you hear him crying, I won't say sobbing, but really struggling to speak because he's so moved, and saying there were people who were like me in their 50s. They weren't all 80s, 90s and people with underlying health conditions. What does that make you feel?
And that's precisely it, Vanessa. When I first heard, I was watching Boris Johnson when he was ill, when he was diagnosed with COVID, and he was continuing to work. And I couldn't watch him through my doctor's lens thinking, gosh, he does not look well. And then he ends up going into hospital. And at that point, I thought, part of me thought, and I can't help it, oh, maybe now he'll understand, because there is nothing like going through an experience. We, within the healthcare profession, can keep trying to explain what it's like. We can show you the figures. I even made films about it to show people what it was like. And then I thought, my God, the Prime Minister of the country has actually got this disease, and he's got it in a really severe way. He's critically unwell. That's why he's in a critical care bed. So I was really surprised by how he didn't get it, because he came out, he recovered, and then what happened after that showed that he didn't really understand it, even though he'd gone through...
What showed he didn't understand
Well,
it?
the way that he... let's talk about the delayed lockdown, looking for other alternatives, getting people, we talked about the Barrington Declaration yesterday, getting epidemiologists who were signed up to that to come in to give an alternative view, sort of the fringe approach as to how we should tackle this when the numbers were starting to go up. The Eat Out to Help Out campaign, which also led to a spike. The
parties. This is the thing.
Parties, you know, and he talked about how the environment in Number 10 and what his team were under, and you know, the setup doesn't allow the rules that he set to be followed. I mean, at the end of the day, he's talking about rules that him and his government set to the rest
and very
of
important,
us.
Adam, right?
And he couldn't get himself or his team to adhere to them. Well, we were in hospitals. It made me think today about the meetings that we were having and the handovers that we were having around the clock.
And what about the leaving parties that you weren't having?
We weren't having leaving parties. We weren't even having tea breaks. We had a rota as to how many people could sit in the tea room.